Story 1. My car broke down next to a freeway on-ramp. I sat down to wait for the tow truck and discovered a plain white envelope in the gravel containing weathered $100 bills. I couldn't believe my luck. I had the car towed to a mechanic who informed me that I had snapped a timing belt. He quoted me $400 to replace and install it. Story 2. I once flipped a coin to decide between heads or tails, and it actually landed on its side. No one was around to see it. No one believes me, but I know. Story 3. I found a cat in my cupboard. No doors or windows were open, and I have 3 Labradors. None of them saw the cat come in or reacted to it. They were all soundly asleep when I arrived. Story 4. Combat veteran. I was shot in the neck, and it was 2 millimeters from paralyzing me for the rest of my life. It felt like a bee sting, and I didn't know what had happened, but they removed the bullet. Story 5. I received a Miele dishwasher valued at $1,500 for free. I ordered it online, and it was delivered to my door with some minor dings and dents. I tried to refuse delivery, but the store informed me that I had ordered the last one and that it would take 2 months to restock the same model. They offered me a full cash refund to purchase another model and said, "Just dispose of it. We don't want it back. We'll write it off on our end," since the return shipping would be too costly. So I disposed of it right in my kitchen. Story 6. Once I was driving to work, and at a red light, I started eating from a single-serve cup of applesauce. I looked over at the driver to my left, and he was doing the same. We briefly made eye contact and then continued on with our day. I wonder if this moment impacted him in the same way it did me. Story 7. I was 9 months pregnant and ran out of gas about a mile from the station. Not that it mattered. I was broke. As I stood there, wondering what to do, an older gentleman and his wife pulled up in their recreational vehicle. They had brought me gas. As we talked, I learned that the man was a retired judge from a city I used to live in about 180 miles away in a different state. My mother still lived there. She was a police officer in the same city. The judge recognized her name. Later, when I told my mother the story, she, too, recognized the judge's name, but not because of the law enforcement connection. Years earlier, in the late 1970s, my parents were involved in a very intense custody dispute over me. My mother went to court and accused my father of kidnapping me to another state. He did not, but that's another story. She was asking the court to grant her emergency custody so she could get assistance from the police in getting me back. The judge who signed the order was the same man who helped me on the side of the road 20 years later in a completely different city. Story 8. A friend and I were fishing when we were around 11 or 12 years old. A storm rolled in quickly, so we ran through a field toward home. He was about 10 feet in front of me when lightning struck the ground between us. Dirt flew into the air. I screamed and nearly jumped out of my skin. My ears were ringing, and I have been scared of lightning ever since that day. Story 9. I once received someone else's lawsuit. We had the same first and last names and lived in the same sizable city, so that was apparently good enough for the person serving the papers. At that time, there was little information available about what to do when something like this occurs. Story 10. I was born with no sense of smell or taste. I don't know the exact rarity, only that it is somewhere between 1 in 1 million to 1 in 1 billion. Story 11. The first and only woman I've ever kissed is the one I ended up marrying, and we're still going strong 23 years later. Story 12. I was on a flight from Dublin to Glasgow listening to Jimmy Eat World on my Discman. A group of guys got on the plane and sat in front of me. It was indeed Jimmy Eat World. When I told them I was currently listening to them, they invited me to their sold-out show in Glasgow. Story 13. One time, for my first skiing experience without parental supervision, I fell while getting on the chairlift. My jacket snagged on the chair, and I was dragged a bit until the attendant noticed and hit the stop button. I broke free and fell. It felt like I fell 50 feet, but it was probably less than 15. Thankfully, there were several feet of snow, which softened my landing. I fell through the snow and hit the ground hard, but not as hard as I would have without the snow. The slope was steep, and there was ice underneath, causing me to slip down the hill a little and pop out at the top of a small cliff. I tumbled head over heels down the cliff and landed on the road directly in front of a service truck that lightly bumped me on the head. I jumped up, assured the stunned worker that I was okay, and scrambled back up the hill to retrieve my skis. I never did find my poles. Then, I shouted to the attendant that I was okay and hurried back to the hotel room. My biggest fear was that my mom, already anxious, would find out what had happened and never let me out of her sight again. This was the 1980s, a time when children had more freedom. I have hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which makes me exceptionally bouncy and stretchy. This was just one of many times a typical person would have broken or sprained something. Story 14. I used to be an international flight attendant working out of John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York. I lived in Baltimore and commuted home between shifts. I was on reserve and asked to cover a flight to Amsterdam, which is a major connecting hub for international flights, so the clientele is incredibly diverse. There was a young woman on my flight who had just flown in from her home country in Eastern Europe. It was her first time flying on a long overseas trip, and she was alone. I checked on her several times during the flight and we bonded a bit. When we landed in New York, I noticed that she was headed to the small connecting flights as well, and there she was again on my flight to Washington, D.C. From there, I would take the train back to Baltimore and then the bus home to my apartment. I had been away for a while, so when I got home, I unpacked my dirty laundry and took the elevator to the basement to do my laundry. When the doors opened, she was there again in my building in Baltimore. I thought I must be hallucinating from sleep deprivation, but she immediately shouted, "You're my flight attendant." Still the weirdest coincidence. Story 15. Rob Whitehoff, the actor who plays John Marston in Red Dead Redemption, was hosting a live Instagram session while building a chicken coop a few years ago. He asked if anyone wanted to sing, and I said yes. I had the opportunity to sing to John Marston on live Instagram. Story 16. When my husband and I had our car break down in the mountains of Utah on a snowy Christmas Eve, we were rescued by Santa Claus in a tow truck. He said he had broken down on a Christmas Eve in the middle of nowhere decades earlier, with no way to get home. Since then, he had been driving around in his tow truck every Christmas Eve. There was no charge for the tow, and he even gave us a free coupon for a motel in the small town where he brought us because he needed to repair our car overnight. That was almost 40 years ago. So this is not the end of the story. About 20 years later, my husband and I were driving in the frozen mountains of Idaho on Christmas Eve to spend the holidays with his family when our car broke down. Different car. Luckily, we were near Fairfield, so we hitched a ride to a phone booth there and called a tow company in the town we were aiming for. We had to wait 45 minutes for it to arrive, and during the 45-minute ride to our destination, I told the truck driver that story. As we got into town, he turned to me and said, "You know what? I'm going to start that tradition here, and you're my first free rescue." Story 17. Being born. Imagine the individual chain of sperm since the first Homo sapiens that led to my existence. Story 18. I was walked in on in a hotel room because the front desk accidentally activated other guests' keys to our room. Story 19. I was leaving a Detroit Lions football game to meet my friends at a bar restaurant in town when I found a wad of $950 on the sidewalk with no one around. It was a blessing since I had to pay for a new tire and rent for the last 2 weeks. My friend was going to treat me to dinner and a couple of beers, but I covered my 2 friends' meals and felt deeply grateful for the assistance. I have found about $20 on the ground before, but this was remarkable. Story 20. A couple of weeks ago, I was making chocolate chip cookies, and I needed 115 grams of butter. I cut a chunk of butter and put it on the scale, and it was exactly 115 grams. This won't happen again. I know it. Story 21. I met my husband online while playing video games. I was in Alabama, and he was in the Bronx. He proposed with a text message and sent me a ring via FedEx. We got married 5 days after we met, and that was over 15 years ago. We are getting a divorce now but remain best friends. He realized he was gay in 2020. We filed for divorce a few months ago because he wanted to ensure I had good health insurance before we divorced. Story 22. I drove over a wrench with my car, and my tire didn't pop. The wrench got stuck in my tire. It was crazy. I do have a picture because nobody believes me. Story 23. I had a daughter with a rare disease that approximately 7,000 people worldwide have. I would not have guessed that. Story 24. I had the state police guard my bomb for me while I toured the state capitol building in 2002 before marijuana was legal. Story 25. I have matte gray eyes, which people think are cool. However, there is under a 1% chance that people are born with this eye color, and out of that, less than 1% may develop a genetic macular degenerative disorder that can lead to blindness. So, it is pretty unlikely that I was born with this condition, and even more unlikely that it will cause me to go blind. But here I am, 26 years old with cool eyes and slowly experiencing vision loss. Story 26. I nearly died from sudden infant death syndrome. My mom found me just in time to be revived. The doctor said that if she had found me even a minute later, I would have died. Story 27. I am a nurse and used to live in Miami. There was a guy in the engineering department whom I would see about 3 times a year. We always struck up a friendly chat and exchanged pleasantries for a couple of minutes, but that was it. I talked to him for a total of about 30 minutes over 5 years. My wife and I went to Paris on vacation. We were walking around the city doing the tourist thing when I heard someone calling my name. It was the engineer on vacation with his family. That was the most random, unlikely thing I have ever experienced. Story 28. When I was a child, my family went to dinner later in the evening on a cold and snowy night. We closed the restaurant down, and when we came out, our car wouldn't start. There was no one around except 2 restaurant workers who didn't have jumper cables. In the 1980s, there were no mobile phones. A car driving past pulled in to see if they could help, and it was another family. They got us started, and my dad thanked them before they left. We let the car run for a few minutes and then headed home, which was in the middle of nowhere. About 15 minutes later, my dad saw a car sitting on the side of a country road. My dad said to my mom, "It's late and freezing. Someone helped us tonight, and we need to help these people." So we pulled over, and it was the same family who had helped us. They had run out of gas. Story 29. When I was a teenager, we had a neighbor across the street who had 3 dogs that were often kept in the fenced yard. So we always heard them barking. One was a blonde Pomeranian, and the other 2 were larger dogs. One day, my dad and I saw the little dog walking around outside in the front yard. Being good neighbors, we picked up the dog to take it home. The garage was open, but none of the 4 regular cars were there. We knocked on the interior garage door, but no one came. We interacted with these neighbors regularly and became concerned that the garage was left open and the dog was loose. My dad tried the doorknob and it was unlocked. He let the dog go inside, and an identical blonde Pomeranian came around the corner to greet us. We were convinced they only had 1 Pomeranian. My dad, who was not a dog lover, shrugged and left the extra dog we helped in their house, and we departed. We never heard a word from the neighbors. It's a funny story that I remember vividly. My dad and I still joke and wonder if they actually had 2 identical dogs or if they came home to a new pet and just accepted it. They always had many pets coming in and out because the mom was a veterinary technician, so maybe they did have 2 Pomeranians. Story 30. I had a patch of clovers in my yard that only produced 4-leaf clovers. I have about 60 of them dried somewhere. Story 31. I was on what was supposed to be a multi-day backpacking trip in the Linville Gorge Wilderness. As I was packing up camp in the morning after one night, I stuffed all my camp clothes, including base layers, a Patagonia puffy jacket with my original Appalachian Trail finisher patches, a rain jacket and pants and socks into its sack and tossed it out of my tent to get it out of the way. It rolled off the cliff I was camping on, and there was no way for me to retrieve it. We had to cut the trip short because it was fall and cold and rainy. About 3 months later, I received a phone call from a man who had been rock climbing in the area and came across the bag. At the time of the camping trip, I was single and had been out a few nights before the trip. I had written my name and number down to give to a man I was talking to at a bar in Asheville. I never ended up giving it to him and must have just kept it in my puffy jacket pocket. That is how the man tracked the bag to me. The contents were mostly intact, and the puffy jacket and rain jacket accompanied me on my subsequent through hikes and backpacking trips for the next 6 years. Story 32. Only two things come to mind. First, I was the head coach of my child's church basketball team when she was around 5 years old, and it felt like herding cats. One day, I had a stray ball in my hand. If you know basketball, it's really small, like a size 3 or 4 soccer ball. In front of my daughter and her new friend, I threw it from one end of the court to the other, straight through the basket. No one else in the crowded gym saw it, but my daughter did and reminds me of it almost every time we go into the driveway to shoot hoops. She's 9 now. The other memorable moment was when one of my father's employees got tickets to WrestleMania 9 in 1993. I was 8, and this would begin my love for wrestling during the Attitude Era. We sat in the 4th row, right in the middle of the ring behind the announcers, and it felt surreal. The worst part wasn't that I was young and couldn't remember certain details. It was that there was so much stimulation, colors, sounds, and everything else, that I can only recall pure joy. It was definitely one of the coolest days of my life. Story 33. Someone experiencing a psychotic episode took razor blades to his face and came to my home at 2 in the morning. I went with him to remove all the sharp objects he owned. I was foolish, and so was he. I never thought that would happen at 16. Story 34. I have a unique name, and people always ask why. My aunt, my great-aunt, and I all have the same name, and we were all born on the same day, though not in the same year. Story 35. I shuffled a deck of cards back into order. Then I lost my mind because I had read how it was statistically impossible. There are more potential arrangements of a deck of cards than grains of sand in the Sahara. The thing is, I was riffle shuffling. That's where you separate the deck into 2 equal packets. Then you run your thumb up the side of each so that they interleave. It turns out that if you do this accurately 8 times, you can shuffle a deck back into order. And that's what I had done. Story 36. I would say Cancer, but technically that was only a 1 in 250 chance. The real answer would have to be winning $5,000 on a $5 scratch-off lottery ticket. If I recall correctly, the odds for that particular prize were about 1 in 75,000. Story 37. A random police officer I met at a stadium 2 hours away is the son of my next-door neighbor. I decided to strike up a conversation with an on-duty police officer at the Toronto Skydome while waiting for my friend in the bathroom. It turns out he is not only from my hometown, but he also went on ride-alongs as a high school student with my father-in-law, and he is the son of my next-door neighbor. Story 38. I used to drive for a ride-sharing service in Miami. One of my passengers told me he had puppies that he couldn't sell, so he offered me one that was the runt of the litter, which nobody wanted. I didn't believe him, so when we arrived at his house, he went inside and brought out a puppy. At that moment, my guard went down, and I got out of the car to take the puppy right by his door. He dropped the puppy and started dragging me into his house. I fought for my life. He was so strong that I was partially pulled inside. I kicked and screamed, but nobody heard me. I scratched and kicked until I finally broke free. He chased me to my car, and I struggled to get the door open, only to face another struggle to get inside. Eventually, I got in and drove away. When I spoke to the ride-sharing company, they couldn't do anything because I had no proof, and all I could do was file a report. I felt so silly, but I was just a young girl. I don't know how he found my contact information, but weeks after the incident, he somehow discovered my name, obtained my number, and called and messaged me multiple times. It was frightening, but eventually he stopped. Story 39. Lightning struck just a few feet ahead of me as I stood on the track. It hit the ground just past the edge. I thought I imagined it, but a few years later I brought it up, and my parents mentioned how frightened they were when it happened, as they were on the other side of the track. Story 40. I'll go with the safe for work one since this isn't a specific online community. I was playing the cheapest slots at the Golden Nugget in Las Vegas when the waitress asked what complimentary drink I would like. I jokingly asked for whiskey and Coke made with Crown Royal Cask number 16. I could see the bar from where I was sitting, and she had the bartender hold up the bottle so I could see it before he poured it. Sure enough, it was Crown Royal Cask number 16 going into my glass. Story 41. I stepped on what I thought was a piece of paper and it got stuck to my shoe. I lifted my foot to look, and it was a $50 bill. Perfect timing too, because it was Saturday night and we were going to a bar. Story 42. My estranged grandfather passed away and left me his rental property business. He was unpleasant and held racist views, but he owned about 20 properties. Although they were in poor condition, I sold them to investors during the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic and was able to purchase a house for my mom and me. Story 43. I was seated towards the back for a David Copperfield show. My husband kept joking that he was going to call me on stage. Midway through the performance, he said he needed a volunteer. He walked down the aisle and signaled to an usher to get me. My husband then said, "I told you so." Story 44. I am a triplet with no fertility treatment, having 2 boys and a girl. We are not identical. Story 45. I'm an extremely average guy, a 5 out of 10 on a good day. When I was a freshman in college, I met a girl on the first weekend who was absolutely a 9 out of 10. A bombshell in our dorm. For months, I would see her on the way to class, in the elevators, and in the lunch hall, and all the guys would be swarming, hitting on her. The whole scene. We would chat from time to time randomly in passing, but nothing serious and certainly never personal. She was well known among the guys on campus as being unattainable. At the end of the semester, we both happened to be in a study area of our dorm building studying for a biology final at the same time. She walked over to ask if I had the notes our professor had given us during the last class. I told her I didn't, but they were up in my room. She then asked, "Can we go get them?" Not thinking much of her comment, I simply said, "Yes." We headed to the elevator and pressed 6 to go up to my floor. Before the door even closed, she grabbed me by my shirt. It was a faded black Billabong shirt, and pulled me in to kiss. Stunned, I just said, "Thank you," like a moron. She then said, "You'll thank me after I get those notes." The door opened, and I rushed to my room with her. The rest stays in that dorm room. For those wondering, she did take the notes afterward. After that semester, I never really saw her much again outside of random sightings on campus, and we would say hello. For context, I went to a public school with over 30,000 students, and it was fall 2004, before cell phones and Facebook. What a time to be alive. Story 46. Join the Navy to repair equipment, get deployed to Afghanistan to make repairs, and get injured by an old Russian grenade in a peaceful area while attempting to make repairs. Story 47. This is not a fun share like your posts, so I apologize in advance for being a downer. It's the ridiculous run of never-ending events that makes it feel least likely to me. Within the span of 18 months, I got unexpectedly divorced. My father died. A very dear friend was terminated at work because of information I discovered and had no choice but to disclose. I changed medications because my previous antidepressant appeared to have stopped working. I had a very bad reaction to the new medication, which was terrifying. I ended up on a 72-hour mental health hold due to this reaction. I nearly lost my mind just from the stress of all the aforementioned items. I participated in an intensive outpatient therapy program. I had to take Family and Medical Leave Act leave to accommodate this program. My ex-husband's favorite cousin became the head of human resources at my job while I was on leave. I found a new job because of this cousin, who decided to launch a baseless investigation against me while I was out. I found a new job, but the agency was poorly managed, so I had to find another job. I found my current job, and from there, things slowly got better. Please remember my story if you are going through some seriously hard times. It really will get better. Story 48. I saw someone get hit by lightning and die from it. I was 5 at the time and have no memory of the event, but apparently, I was very close to the woman from my daycare. My family mentioned it casually one day, and let me tell you, I was shocked. Story 49. My son ruptured my uterus during birth. I labored for a total of 28 hours, pushed for 6 hours, and my son showed signs of distress, so they took me for a cesarean section. When they opened me up, the doctor exclaimed in shock. He wasn't descending through my birth canal. Instead, he was coming through my uterus. If it weren't for the doctors and medical science, we could have died. It is very fatal. I had a perfectly healthy pregnancy, no pre-existing medical conditions, and no issues with my menstrual cycle or endometriosis, so this was very unlikely. In my 35 years of practice, I have never seen anything like this. They conducted a case study on it. Story 50. Imagine there is a movie titled with your first name, which is not a common name. In the movie, there is a diner called Mimi's. In real life, the diner is a real place and is named after your last name, which is even more unique. Story 51. Most of my luck shows up in video games. Recently, I had some extra in-game currency in League of Legends when they introduced a new gacha system for an exalted skin with a 0.5% drop rate. I decided to do just one roll to test the system and check out the animation, and I actually got the skin. Now when I play, it kind of looks like I spent hundreds of dollars on the game, which is a little embarrassing since the guaranteed cost for that skin is around $250. But I just got super lucky on my first try. Story 52. The drive shaft of my fiance's car dropped directly out of the bottom of the vehicle, just as we were turning into our apartment's parking lot. When it dropped, the steering wheel stopped working, and we had to sit in the car until the Canadian Automobile Association arrived. My fiancé had to keep his foot pressed on the brake because if he didn't, the car would have rolled down the hill the apartment was situated on and possibly into a car on the side of the road, the grocery store parking lot, or the lake if it didn't hit anything on the way down. Not even 5 minutes before it dropped, we were on the highway. Story 53. I was playing Pokemon Heart Gold and in the Safari Zone I thought, I hope I don't get a shiny. That would be a hassle, considering how often they tend to run away. The very next Pokemon I encountered was a shiny, and I caught it. He's a Sandslash named The Sauce. Story 54. I was at a gas station 1,000 miles away and happened to run into someone from my small town. They were also that far from home at the same place and time. Story 55. A black cat died on my doorstep on Halloween. It was Halloween morning and I was about 9 years old. A black cat walked up to our front door, laid down, and died. It seemed perfectly fine when I saw it walk up. When I went to leave through the front door a few minutes later, it didn't move. When I came back after school that day, rigor mortis had set in. Story 56. My mom was adopted in the 1950s. In 1997, when I was 6, my mom was reunited with her birth family, and they are multimillionaires. I grew up poor, so it was a wild experience and still is. Story 57. I went to a baseball game and got hit in the groin by a foul ball. It was one of 3 that went into the stands that day. I still have that ball. Story 58. I watched a movie, and the day after, I went to the beach where it was filmed. I met the actress who played the main character. What are the chances? Story 59. Before my dad passed away, he gave me his Harley bike. About a year after he died, someone at work backed into the bike, knocking it over. Their insurance paid out nearly $1,000 for some scratches on the bags and pipes, which was just cosmetic damage. At the time, my cousin was organizing a fishing trip with the guys, and with flights, food, and hotel costs, it was close to $1,000. I kept saying no because I couldn't afford it. Thanks, Dad. I was able to go on the trip. Story 60. I was at my doctor's office for a blood pressure check, and as I was walking out, she said, "Oh, you just turned 45. It's time for a colonoscopy," and had her nurse give me a referral. I got in my car and looked at the referral for a while, and something inside me said, "You better do this, like now." In the parking lot, I called and made an appointment. The earliest one was 6 weeks away. Fast forward, I was diagnosed with stage 3 rectal cancer. If I hadn't gone to my doctor's office for the blood pressure check when I did, she may not have had the chance to remind me that I was at the age for a colonoscopy, which had just changed from 50 to 45. Who knows where I would be today? I am 100% cured, by the way. Story 61. Do you know how volleyball nets are attached to opposing walls? My friend and I were hitting the ball, and I hit it just right where it struck the left wall, rolled onto the line of the net, and went halfway across before it fell off. No camera. It was a shame. Story 62. There's a person with my name who was born on the same day and has a slightly similar social security number. We also lived in some of the same counties in Texas. I discovered this years ago when I applied for a credit card and he appeared on my credit report along with defaulted loans, back child support, and other financial issues. The strangest occurrence happened when I attended Texas Tech University. He lived in that area during my time there. Story 63. When I was a child, around 8 or 9 years old, I had a neighbor the same age as me. We used to play together in the condominium, along with some friends who were 3 years older. They talked about sex and masturbation around us, which made us curious. Eventually, there came a time when it was just the two of us at night in the condominium, discussing what sex was like. In that moment, we began to face each other and wondered why we shouldn't explore this in a hidden place. That's what happened. We started doing this a few days a week until a few months later when she moved away, and we never met again until today, almost a decade later. Story 64. After undergoing open-heart surgery for an aneurysm, I developed an internal infection and was readmitted for 19 days. Prior to the operation, I was informed that the chances of an infection were less than 0.5%. Story 65. I have only played the lottery once in my 31 years. The one and only time I played, my grandmother won. Story 66. I went to a Phillies game in Philadelphia. I got stuck in a traffic jam and didn't reach the stadium until the 5th inning. When I tried to find my seat, someone was sitting in it. It turned out I was in the wrong section, but the person I thought was in my seat was a coworker I cleaned a gym with at night, 100 miles away in our hometown. I had no idea he would be there. Very ironic. Story 67. I grew up in Georgia and lived in California for 15 years. Around year 12, I visited a friend in the Bay Area. I needed to kill time, so I went to Fry's Electronics. I ran into someone from college who was in the area visiting a friend and also needed to kill time. It was their first time in California and the last day of their visit. I got married and started a family at age 42. Story 68. I tore my meniscus while walking. I wasn't bending, twisting, or doing anything unusual, just walking around the house. At 19, I couldn't come up with a good story for it. Story 69. I had a severe blowout on Interstate 80 between Elko and Winnemucca, New Mexico. The car fishtailed and spun out. The vehicle was totaled, but I emerged physically unscathed. Story 70. I have shared this before. When I was about 12, I was standing on a small bridge overlooking a lake with some friends. Other kids were riding bikes down the banks and jumping them into the lake. Suddenly, someone lifted me from behind and threw me over the railing into the lake. I still have the scars on my forearms from trying to grab on as I fell. Over 30 years later, I was mostly fine and swam to the side. An older kid came up to me and said, "Oh, sorry, I thought you were someone else." Story 71. When I was younger, working as a waitress and living with my parents, I was going through my cash and organizing it into piles for bills. My wallet was empty, but I thought to myself, I wish I had another $50 to give to my parents for rent. I looked back in the wallet, and a $50 bill was there. I was, and still am, completely surprised by that instant manifestation. Story 72. Run over by my mom. When I was struck, I curled into a ball. Almost all the muscles in my back and shoulders were stretched beyond normal capacity. I was told that I would never lift more than 5 pounds without strain and would never run without pain again. I had been a trombone player who loved marching for about 5 years at that point. I just didn't stop what I loved. I took things as easy as possible for about a month. I eventually competed in drum corps and progressed to marching a sousaphone. I am now a chef and I handle cases of meat regularly. My advice: listen to the doctors but take it with a grain of salt. Take their advice, give yourself time to heal, and have the patience to rebuild. Doctors operate within a limited understanding of humanity, and while they have your best interests at heart, you know yourself better. Story 73. I got divorced from my first relationship. I never thought I would get divorced, especially at 22. Story 74. I decided to travel to Spain for the first time in my life, but my flight was on the only day Spain and Portugal experienced a historic mass outage that caused all flights to be canceled. Flights returned to normal the following day. Story 75. Placental eruption during labor occurred with the rapid onset of preeclampsia, followed by 2 postpartum hemorrhages. My obstetrician said someone upstairs hates me. Story 76. I was walking home from work and found about $200 in loose cash in a Chili's parking lot. I decided to buy a brand new ceiling fan for my bedroom with it. Story 77. I had a mammogram at the age of 31 with no symptoms and discovered a benign tumor. Last year, I decided to donate my liver to a stranger. As part of the process, I underwent numerous medical tests, including computed tomography and magnetic resonance imaging. I was ultimately ruled out as a donor due to a hemangioma, which is a type of benign tumor on my liver. The tests also revealed a small structure in my breast. I was referred for a mammogram, which few women receive before the age of 40. I had the mammogram and they found a lump. Fortunately for me, they concluded it was a fibroadenoma, another benign tumor. While these tumors are usually asymptomatic, they can grow, so it was fortunate that both the fibroadenoma and the hemangioma were recognized. Story 78. I saw Diana Ross while I was working as an extra for a television show or movie, though I can't remember which. She came there to meet someone unexpectedly. Story 79. I played Mario Party the other night with my husband. He was about to roll a triple die. I called out 111, and he actually rolled it. Story 80. I woke up in the middle of several dentists filling for cavities when I was 4 or 5. It was terrifying. Story 81. I never had a lot of money. One day, right around my birthday, my husband and I ran some errands. We had to make a couple of returns, one at a toy store that no longer exists, and the other at a retail store for myself. We planned to spend the money from the returns on me. I remember it being late because the parking lot was empty. We went in, made the return, and when we got back to the car, I saw a bill on the ground near the car. I picked it up, and it was a $100 bill. Needless to say, I made my return and had a good birthday. Story 82. I found 9 4-leaf clovers, some of which were 5-leaf. It was nice because I had been feeling very unlucky lately. Story 83. I was away from home for a months-long temporary job. I started fostering cats while I was there. I heated up a frozen pot pie for dinner, and my foster cat walked over, stepped into the middle of the pie, and stood there. I do a good impression of Cartman, and this was my 1 in a million chance to use one of his famous lines from South Park. "That's my pot pie, Kitty." Fortunately, the pie hadn't heated up all the way, so Kitty did not get burned. Story 84. I am living in my car with $5 to my name. I spotted some people pointing into the water, went to take a look, and saw $100 floating in the harbor. Exactly what I needed until I got my next payday. Story 85. Luckily, I had 2 people witness this. I was in the car with my boss and coworker, heading to a storage shed and talking about dream cars. At the time, I really wanted a Jimny, and there's a guy on TikTok who calls the green color wheelie bin green, which I was sharing with them. 20 seconds later, one drove past us. A Jimny in wheelie bin green, with a number plate bearing my name. I felt like it was a dream, but I checked the registration online, and it still comes up. Story 86. I was out for a walk with my baby and husband when it started to get dark. A giant moth flew directly into my ear. I was terrified. I could feel it trying to dig further into my ear. My husband managed to get it out with tweezers, and when he pulled it out, the insect started flying around the room. Now I have a serious phobia of things flying near my ears. Story 87. The light above my head caught fire while I was 6 months pregnant. It was my birthday, and we were going to have breakfast that morning. I opted for homemade chocolate chip pancakes instead. Again, on my birthday when I was turning maybe 9 or 10, a lightning strike hit the tree in our backyard, and there was literally a tree sticking out of the side of the house. I'm convinced I will die on my birthday. Story 88. I once had a carton of 12 eggs. That's it. That's the story. No, just kidding. I don't remember exactly, but nearly every egg had a double yolk. Story 89. I found the only woman on earth who would tolerate my behavior. I am still married to her 63 years later. Story 90. I won a free brand new roof last year through my local radio station. They do it every year and partner with a local contractor to give away a new roof to a deserving family. A few of my friends nominated me, and I still can't believe I won. I had a significant water leak in my roof that came through, creating a hole in my ceiling and damaging the wall next to it. I was recently diagnosed with an extremely rare genetic disease and am legally blind and unable to walk, so my job terminated my employment. I was on disability, and there was no way I could ever afford a new roof or repairs, nor could I get up on the roof to fix it myself. Of all the prizes I have ever won in my life, this was the one that I needed the most and for which I am most grateful. Then, 2 weeks after my new roof was installed, my air conditioning unit failed, and I need an entirely new heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system. Story 91. Oh, I thought of another one besides winning the raffle that I really wanted to win. Even though I had entered probably 30 raffles that day at a convention, I only cared about winning one of them, and I actually won that one. This probably boils down to the odds, but I live in an area with a lot of wildlife. Every time I take a hike, I usually say today is the day I'm going to see a bear or today is the day I'm going to see a mountain lion. I kind of just say whichever one I feel like in the moment. I usually hike alone, but on that fateful day, I was hiking with a friend. Before we started, I turned to her and said today is the day I'm going to see a bear. I told her I say one of those before every hike. She laughed, and we began our hike. It was near dusk because there had been a thunderstorm, so we had to leave and come back after the storm was over, which meant there weren't very many hikers out. Suddenly, we both smelled coffee. We didn't think much of it because we knew there were some people behind us a little ways, and we figured they had coffee from a cafe. It smelled kind of bitter and acrid, similar to the coffee served on airplanes when the smell mixes with urine from the bathroom, and it's just unpleasant. Then, a little less than a football field away, a big mother bear sauntered through the area. We never saw the cubs, but other people we encountered said they saw cubs too. Still, I have not seen the mountain lion yet. Story 92. I was driving on a clear day, with no planes overhead or nearby. There were cornfields on either side of me. Suddenly, something fell from the sky and knocked my driver's side mirror off. It was space junk that fell from orbit and hit my car. I am thankful that it didn't come through the windshield. Story 93. Today, my new gynecologist guessed that I ride a motorcycle just from my vibe. This would be one thing if I looked the part, but I'm a small, thin, young-looking woman in a conservative profession. I have some decorative floral tattoos and colorful nails, but everyone in my personal and professional life is completely caught off guard when I tell them I ride a motorcycle. It does not compute. Meanwhile, I had just met this woman. We talked about dogs and hiking for a minute, and then she turned to me and asked, "Do you ride motorcycles?" Story 94. The first time I visited New York City was for an interview for a job overseas. I met my interviewer at a Starbucks in a very distinctive building, where one interior wall featured a 3- or 4-story waterfall. I got the job and worked at a school in India before taking a new position in another city in India. That job eventually helped me relocate to their New York City location, and my office was in the same building where I had interviewed years earlier. Story 95. Someone said to me, "I really want to kiss you right now," and actually did it. I thought we were friends, nothing more. Story 96. A horse kicked me in the face, breaking my cheekbone and chipping 4 teeth, but it avoided my eye socket and jaw completely. I received about 40 stitches under my eye, and you can barely tell. I still have significant nerve damage and numbness on one side of my face 2.5 years later, but that's a small price to pay for what could have happened. Story 97. Once, I became extremely sick, with a fever and full body aches. I was so ill that it took me over 5 minutes to walk from my bed on the first floor to the kitchen downstairs. I had no desire to eat, but I needed to since I had not eaten all day. I used the walls for support as I walked from the kitchen to the dining table. When I sat down to eat, on the second bite, I could literally feel my temperature dropping, starting from my feet and rising up. Within a minute, I felt fine, walking without any issues, my temperature normal and no headache. I never understood what happened. Story 98. Several times, I found a neighbor's puppy running in the street. Knowing it could get hit, I took it to the owners. One day, they weren't home, so I put the puppy in my backyard. That night, as I was backing out of my driveway, my husband opened the gate. The puppy ran behind my car, and I accidentally drove over it. It died immediately. Story 99. I started going gray at 15 years old. I also have a rare disease called eosinophilic esophagitis. My immune system attacks my esophagus if I consume milk proteins. Story 100. I performed on stage with an artist who is a significant influence on my music and an even greater influence on my husband's music. I will not name this artist. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.